Does this sound okay? Yep. So my name is Adam Bell. I'm part of the Security CXP team here at Microsoft. And the Security CXP team are part of the Azure Information Protection product group. And our role basically is to work with our large enterprise customers and partners like identity experts and get the most value out of AIP. So this is what I do day in and day out. We do workshops and we help with planning sessions. The session today is around AIP. And let's start by defining what we mean by information protection. It can mean many different things depending on what we're talking about, and it can be as simple as the Kensington lock holding your laptop to your desk. It could be a whole disk encryption, a BitLocker, all the way through to AD rights management and removing controls from applications. But when we talk about information protection, what we're really talking about is protecting your sensitive data throughout its life cycle, inside and outside your organization. When we say data, we're talking about end-user unstructured data. So it's whatever documents you're working on, whether it be emails, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever you as a user sat in front of a keyboard are working on. That's what our team focuses on. It's about helping you identify what you've got, where is it, and who's got access to that, even if it leaves your organization. So for the session today, when we say information protection, this is what we're talking about. Just before we go into this, there's three things I want you to take away from this session today. The first one is what is AIP, how you can start using AIP in your organization today, and also what we're working on as a roadmap perspective for the year 2018. So they're the three things we'll focus on as we're going through this journey. This is a very popular slide. It was in Brandon's slide deck. If you've been to any Microsoft presentation, probably in the last 2 years, it pops up a lot. I've only really got it in here for the simple focus of this blue ring around the perimeter. And if we think historically, this was where a lot of our security effort was in trying to protect our data. It was this single sort of perimeter around everything. But that's not where we are today. Okay, the boundaries have kind of gone. Users aren't just working on a desktop in an office. They're working on laptops, tablets, phones. They're in the office, they're at home, the hotel in Hong Kong, pretty much everywhere. And a byproduct of that means that your data, whether as an IT team you know it or not, it's now traveling. And across the enterprise mobility and security suite, there's lots of products we've got there that can help bring this back under control, so it's not quite as scary as it looks today. And AIP is one of these products. Now, I'm lucky enough to be part of a small team that works around the world with customers, focusing on deploying our product. I'm not in sales, I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's really around AIP. And these are some of the things that we hear. Okay, we're moving to Office 365 and we need to prepare for that. We're moving from this kind of known control plane where I've got a server in the corner and I can reach out and touch it to something that might make you a little bit more uncomfortable. And so there's preparation that you need to do around that. We've got security and compliance sort of regulatory requirements that are getting sort of precedents. And one of the things around that is understanding what that means to your organization and how you can cope with that. A large part of what you do with an information protection project isn't technology-based. You can literally configure AIP in 20 minutes. Bang, it's done. But it's building up to knowing all the questions you need to answer before you get there, and that's the difficult part. And a large portion of it isn't technological. It's end users, and it's understanding how we can make this proposition as easy as we can for them. And then there's sharing with external partners, customers, suppliers. How can you do that? How can you do that, remain control of your data, and how can you do that securely? Hopefully, these are things that sound familiar to you and resonate with you. If it's not, please come find me. I'd love to hear all the pain points that you guys are having, because a large role of our team is understanding what's going on with our customers. We take that back to other members within our team, and that gets baked into our products as we go forward. Not a great surprise where Azure Information Protection sits in the Microsoft stack. I'll just touch on this slide briefly. We've got lots of complementary products out there that can come together to give you a much better security story. It's not just about working in silos. So we've talked about Azure Information Protection. You might have already heard the term before, Microsoft Information Protection. And what you're going to start hearing is this sort of change within Microsoft from it being just an add-on to Office. It's not just about Azure Information Protection anymore. When you start thinking about the life cycle of your data, it doesn't just stay on one device, it doesn't just stay in one storage location, it moves. And what we need to ensure is that we've got a solution and a platform that can support you around that. So you get this consistent level of protection, and you get consistent behavior and taxonomy across all the products that you might want to use. So we've got the products along the bottom there, and as we go forward on our roadmap, we talk about this a bit later on, you'll start to see the integration that you can get across this platform and into these other products that can help you with this much more robust, secure proposition. By all means, interrupt me as you're going along as well. There's about 20 minutes of slides, and then we'll try and break things up with demos, but it's going to be pretty dry if it's just me talking up front here. So, how do we get started with this? How do we do information protection? We've kind of got 4 main areas that fall within information protection lifecycle. When we start with detection, we need to help you understand what your data is, where it is, and how you can have access to it. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. We've got the agent today that sits inside Office, and so you've got end users that will be labeling and classifying the documentation for new documents and also for the documents that they're editing. That's great. Also, all the data at rest, we've got the AIP scanner, which we'll touch on in a little bit, and that gives you the ability to tackle all the data that you've got scattered around your environment. And it's really looking into what have you got and trying to drop it into these kind of buckets, I guess, so you can understand how much you care about it. If we start looking at classify, it's around the business rules that you want to bring so you can automatically apply labels to your content. And you've got a vast array of data out there, ranging from data that's publicly available, so you're probably not too worried about visual markings or protection, but you want to know where it is, all the way through to that really sensitive stuff, that crown jewels. And that's the data we want to help you identify and be able to protect and track where that goes, which then leads us to protection. So we've had protection now since Server 2003. It was originally AD rights management. It's very mature technology in the way that it approaches the encryption and the protection. But not everything wants to be protected. We find that in most organizations, it's between about 5 and 15% of the documents that you really want to protect. So it's really around us being able to help you identify those documents, apply the right policies and the right protection so that you know where your data is, regardless of whether it goes outside the organization or not. And that comes from the monitoring. You want to monitor what's going on, so that your users are doing what you think they are, and identify those that aren't, whether it be through education purposes or whether because they're up to malicious deeds and they're declassifying large amounts of documentation. And so across all these areas, as you progress through an information protection project, you'll touch on all these areas. And it's one of these things that it's not just a go to Azure, 20 minutes, configure it, job done, you go to the pub. Unfortunately, it's something you want to iterate. The most successful deployments we've found are those where it's broken down into small chunks and you basically complete a phase and then build on that previous phase as you move forward. And what's important from, I guess, from a customer perspective is that as Microsoft release new features and updates over the course of this year, you probably want to incorporate those into your phases as you iterate. We talked about labeling. So, what is a label? So, in essence, it's a piece of metadata written to a document in clear text. So, even if a document is actually protected and it's encrypted, we can still see that metadata. And the advantage there is we can use border gateway control devices or DLP engines, and we can still ensure an appropriate flow for that document through the environment. So, if you've got something that's marked as internal and a user tries to email that to an external recipient, even if it's protected, we can still apply some logic to that says, hey, maybe this isn't something we want to do. And we can either block it or you can report on it, and there's lots of different approaches you can use there. So we've covered off step 1, what's AIP? Step 2, what are the basics? How do we go about deploying this today? Now, when we work with customers, we see 2 successful approaches to this. Regardless of which approach you take, you need a taxonomy. So the taxonomy is a set of labels that make sense to you. And then the use cases are, where are you deploying this? And there's 2 ways to do it. One is simple and broad, so turn on labeling, whole organization. The advantage of the labeling is it doesn't break anything. Nothing stops working because you've not applied a label. I guess the most effort on a labeling perspective is you've still got your end users that you've got to train. Okay, so you've still got the end user training, the business transformation piece. But the advantage of this is it gives you the proposition of getting the users engaged in what's expected of them. It gets them using this in their daily workflow. You've then got the IT team that starts to understand what sort of calls and tickets come out of this, and you can start to baseline your project. And then from that point, you can then start building on additional capabilities. We talk about taxonomy. This is actually the taxonomy we use at Microsoft. We've got 5 high-level labels, parent labels, and then we have a couple of sub-labels. The sub-labels, from our perspective, are where we apply slightly different conditions on who can do what with that label. But this conversation with customers can be as fast as 5 minutes. Great, we've already got taxonomy, it's signed off by the business, we're ready to go. And I've seen customers where it takes 6 months because it's trying to work out who can sign off on an agreed set of labels across a whole organization. So this can actually be quite a difficult point. Microsoft have invested a fair amount of time and research in providing a default set of labels available, which is very similar to this actually. And it's a great place to start if you don't have that taxonomy already. The thing I like about the taxonomy is from a user perspective, it's a much better proposition. If we think kind of pre-labels and we had RMS, it was, do I protect this document or not? It doesn't really fit in a user's workday. Whereas at least with labels, it's a much better proposition. It's, hey, is this going to be public? Is this highly confidential? Is this non-business? And the other thing about labels is they don't have to be set in stone out of the gate. So when you're going through your pilot phase and you're trying to work out what's the right set of labels for your organization, you can still make changes. And at Microsoft, the non-business label initially started off as personal. However, it was confusing. Is that personal identifiable information? Is it personal to me? It caused confusion, so we changed it. What you don't want to do is change this 6 months down the track. I think that's going to cause you lots of problems, but you don't have to hold off because you're trying to get all these labels right. You can get to where you think's a pretty good start, and then you pilot this with your friendly users and your IT groups, and then you can get some feedback and you can make the changes required. So I've touched on this part already, but it's highly recommended, and what we've seen work very successful with customers is to start with classification only. Start with your labels. Because the advantage once you've started to label your documentation is you can start to then build on top of that and do other things. You can enable exchange transport rules that say, hey, if you see this label, take this action. We can start looking at other scenarios like, well, how are we going to share with external users? So it really gives you that solid foundation and then being able to build upon it. Yes. So we started off with RMS. We moved it to Azure RMS. We then procured a company 2 years ago called Secure Islands, which brought us our labeling and classification functionality. But what have we been doing since? Well, we've had quite a few feature updates in the last few months. At Ignite last year, we announced Office Message Encryption, OME. It's now version 2. What this allows you to do is send a protected email pretty much to anybody with an email address, and it's really simple to do. If you've got an Office 365 tenant and you've had it for a while, there's about 24 lines of PowerShell you need to run once just to configure your tenant to say, use OME v2. If you've got a new tenant, it's enabled by default. And what this allows you to do is basically from within an email, and I will demo this shortly actually, but from within the email, select the Do Not Forward button and then put in your recipients. You'll get a tooltip in Outlook saying, hey, this is a Do Not Forward template. And then you can send your email. Now, if you're sending it to another Office 365 user outside your tenant and they're using Outlook 2016, not a great surprise. It's a seamless experience. It renders in Outlook for them. They get the tooltip saying it's got Do Not Forward, and they can't forward and they can't print. But if you're sending it to what we call a federated user, so we've got 3 types of federated users. We've got Microsoft accounts, we've got Yahoo, and we've got Google. They're given a link inside their email that says, go here to get the email. And they're redirected to an Office 365 portal where they log on using their credentials. And at this point, we web render that email. And if the attachments can be web rendered, we'll render those as well. But they can't forward and they can't print. The email is sent secure from the moment you click send. It's protected during transit, and it arrives at their end protected as well. We do the best that we can to validate that user is who they say they are. And if you're anybody else that's not an Office 365 tenant or a federated user, we give you the ability to click a link to request a one-time password. You redirect it to the Office 365 portal, you put in your 9-digit code, and again, it web renders the email and the attachments if it can. So straight away, we've got this really simple way of collaborating external with users and customers and suppliers. That's what we announced at Ignite. We've now just announced an update for this called Encrypt Only. It's pretty much the same premise, but we've made one small change. And at the moment, this is only available through Outlook Web Access. And basically, you click the Protect button and change, and you select the Encrypt instead of Do Not Forward. And what this basically lets you do is the same thing, only you can forward and print the emails. This will roll out to Office 365 click to run in the coming months as we come through the update channels. Okay, AOP scanner. Any questions so far, by the way? Might get to lunch early at this rate. So, okay, AOP scanner, we've talked about it in Office. You can classify and label. That's great. So from that point onwards, you've got something happening. But what about the terabytes and petabytes of data you've got on premise? So recently we released AOP scanner. It's basically uses the same policies that you define within AIP, so you're not having to redo the effort. Okay, it's kind of configure once and let's use the same taxonomy. And it can be used to scan your on-premise file stores. And the real focus here is on-premise. If you've got something like SharePoint Online that you want to tackle, that's where Cloud App Security comes in, and you can do the same thing but through Cloud App Security. But it's aimed at using anything that we can talk to over SMB. So that can be a SAN, it can be a Linux box, it can be a Windows machine, doesn't matter as long as we can get to it over SMB. Or SharePoint 2013 or 2016 on-premise. What this basically does is it will take the automation rules, the business rules you've defined in AIP, and it will scan these repositories that you've identified. And there's two modes we can run it in. We can run it in Discovery, or we can run it in Label and Protect. And in Discovery, it will run through and give you a CSV at the end of it that shows basically every file that it found a match against and what it would have done and why. So if you've got something that says, if I see UK postcode and that's confidential, it will say, hey, this file was checked in this location, we found a UK postcode, and we would have applied a confidential label. So you get a kind of fairly detailed report. And that's not actually touching the data, that's just actually scanning through it in Discovery. You can then say, go back and actually do this for me, but actually apply that classification. And if the label that you're applying has protection, it will encrypt the file as well. So if we look at the architecture for scanner, it's fairly straightforward. It requires a server. It can be VM or physical. We recommend that you place it close to your data. So if you've got 4, 10 data centers around the world, this is where you want to place them. Each server today operates in isolation, so they have to be configured separately and locally. We do have this on the roadmap that will provide a UI for this. It'll be done through Azure, and it'll let you configure it centrally. And it needs access to the cloud. And there's ways around this, but it's more straightforward if you've got access to the cloud so that you can talk to the Azure Information Protection Portal and download these policies that it's trying to search for. I will do a demo of this in a little bit. It's a bit dry to watch because there is no UI at the moment. It's all run through PowerShell, but it's pretty straightforward. So I touched on Cloud App Security before, MCAS. This is Microsoft's CASB solution. We've recently announced that we're now integrating with AIP, which is great. What this effectively means is when you're defining policies within MCAS, you can specify, well, there's two things you can specify. First of all, you can specify if you find content such as credit cards, then one of the actions I want to do is apply a label. And you can see here that, and this is different to my test lab, but you can see labels within your AIP tenant, and you can select the label you want to apply. The really cool thing here, this is the kind of geeky me, I guess, is if that label has protection, it will apply that protection. So this is an example of being able to reach beyond your traditional perimeter and out into a SaaS application. In this instance, it's the corporate box account, and actually protect a file. So once it leaves your perimeter, you haven't lost control. The other action we can take within MCAS is we can also say, if I find this label in a document in one of my SaaS applications to do something. So for example, if you've got a label called highly confidential and you find that in the corporate box account, you might want to remove sharing. So we've got more and more options available across the products to try and claw control back over our data, regardless of where it is. And this is something I think Brandon touched on earlier about role-based access. So up until recently, if you wanted to configure information protection, you had to be a global administrator or a security administrator. We've now managed to get a role. It's called Information Protection Administrator. And this sits really well for our customers that have role-based access and their teams are split up, where it's not just one team managing everything. So with this role, you can manage anything you need to manage with Azure Information Protection. Now, we've talked about conditional access before with Brandon. AIP understands conditional access. It's available as an application you can select. And the great thing here is any of the policies or the configurations that you would specify in conditional access against other apps, you can apply against AIP. So what this means is you can sit there and say, to consume my protected content, it must be on a managed device, or it must be on an IP network that's been defined as the corporate network, or it must use MFA. So it doesn't matter if they're sitting in a hotel in Hong Kong. If you've said it's going to be on a managed device, you've still got those control measures in place. And if you don't meet the requirements, you can't access the document. It does provide enough information in this instance to actually give the help desk a bit of a hint, unlike some of our errors. Okay, any questions before we try and do these demos?
I just want to know, is that AIP scanner server environment or desktop environment, or how does it work?
It's aimed at file servers, and so it's installed on a server and deployed in data centers or in your server rooms.
Adam, I'll ask a quick question. Auditing around AIP, thinking of that horrible four-letter word, and you want to trace where data's kind of come from and gone.
Yep.
Those-wise, or where
That's a good question. There's a couple of ways when it comes to auditing. We've got the tracking and revoke portal, which is aimed at the end users. So as an end user, if you send a protected document out, you can go to this portal and you can see everyone that's opened it, which is hopefully on your approved list. It'll deny them if they're not, but you'll see that as well. And you've also got the ability to revoke if you want to stop that document from being accessed, period, anymore. So that's the first part. Every activity that occurs within AIP is logged to the event logs locally. So today, you've got some heavy lifting to do to get that to somewhere you can manage. So we've got some customers using Windows Event Forwarding, for example, or if you've got Operations Manager deployed, you can use Ops Manager to pull those into somewhere that you can then perform some reporting on. And that will include everything that's happened. So whether they've declassified, whether they've changed the reclassified and the reasons, pretty much everything that the AIP agent does is logged there. It's not the best user experience because you've got to get those logs from each end device to somewhere that you can manage them. So as part of our roadmap, in sort of Q3 timeframe this year, we've got centralized logging and reporting. And this is where the agents will then send all those logs directly to an OMS instance, and then we'll have some dashboards that will allow you to surface a lot of what's going on around that. And one of the popular questions that comes up immediately after I've said that is, how much is OMS going to cost me? While this is still being determined, the aim is it won't cost you anything for reasonable use. So you'll be able to look at the last 90 days of activity, and it's all included as part of your current subscriptions. That's a very high demand item, is the centralized logging and reporting, which is coming shortly. Good question. Okay, I'll try some demos. We'll see if the demo gods are friendly today. Just while I'm setting up, I'm going to open Word. Now I've got a label. In fact, let's talk about the toolbar here. So you can see that I don't have a default label set. We've got not set sitting there. One of the things you can do to make life a bit easier for your users is define a default label. At Microsoft, we have the default of general. We've got parent labels here. You can see there's a little black triangle tells me I've got sub-labels. And you can see I've got a couple of options here. What I've got is some automation that says if I see the word confidential twice in a document, I actually want to mark this as confidential. So it's really weird, actually. I can't see myself typing. So we'll type confidential. And now there's two ways that AIP scans, or two times that it scans a document. Traditionally, it's on save. You can enable asynchronous. In the current client that we released a couple of weeks ago, which is version 1.26, it's turned off by default, so it will detect on save. If you turn asynchronous on, it will basically detect any content within about 8 seconds. So it's pretty good. I will save. Lovely. It normally works fine, but for some reason, It's obscured. Great. I think this is actually more my resolution on the screen. Works fine every time you do the demo, except when you do the demo. Oh, let's try that again. Okay, so confidential is the magic word. Let's give it some more content. And this isn't case sensitive. You can make it case sensitive. There's lots of options available there. That's a bit better. Okay, so here you can see we've got the option. It's identified the fact I've got confidential and says, hey, do you want to change this now? So we will. Now this label, as you can see, has visual markings defined as well. So now I've got the watermark across my document and I've got the footer as well that says, hey, this is classified as confidential. This label doesn't apply for protection, but if it did, at this point it'd be protected with Azure rights management as well. Any questions around that? I'm not using protection for this one, so we'll perhaps come back to that. Okay, what I also have here is a corporate box account, and I've got a document I defined earlier. Let's have a look. It has some credit card information within it. And I have a policy that says in MCAS, if you see a document with credit cards, I actually want to apply a label. And the label I'm choosing to apply actually has protection. So we've got this credit card document. Open that up for a moment. You can see we've got some credit card numbers in there. That's stuff we probably don't want sitting on a widely shared platform. Upload. Now in production, this would actually spot this and apply the protection fairly quickly. The demo environments we're using has near real time turned off, so it can be a little slow. So what I might just do is I'll leave that for a moment and I'll move on to another demo and we'll come back to it. So if we talked about Office message encryption, let's have a look at that for a moment. So I'm logged in as a test user, ironically named Paddington Bear. We'll just let him open his Outlook. And I'm going to send this to a Gmail account. And we can see the behavior that we get. So it's already configured on my tenant. I can click a new email. I select the Do Not Forward button. And I can't type. Still can't type. Okay, and what am I doing? Let's send that. So that's sent. If we now go to my Gmail account, I'm already logged on. So in a few minutes I'll get an email land. Because it's not an application that understands what an encrypted message is, we see what's called a wrapper email. And the wrapper basically gives us the user instructions of what they need to do next. So let's have a look. There we go. So I've got a new email. I want to open this email. Awesome. And this is why you don't do live demos. All right, let me just do this. See, that's how secure it is. So this would be a great opportunity for someone to ask a question at this point. There we go. Let's try that again. It's a very good question. I believe it's part of Office 365 E3. So even though it's leveraging AIP on the back end at the Exchange level, is that me? There's no additional license required, so you don't need AIP for this. And just broadly speaking, AIP falls into two buckets. Well, I guess we're talking about licensing. We've got what we call P1, which falls under EMS E3, and that's everything that's manually driven. And then we've got P2, which falls into EMS E5, usually, and that's all the automation. So if you're using the conditions or MCAS, that's where the E5 element comes into. Okay, let's see if rather than drag that around, let's see if we can duplicate. There we go, okay. So this is the email they will see. You can brand this, doesn't have to say Office 365. Nope, it doesn't like duplicate. Okay, we won't do that then. See if we can switch back to extended. What did you fix before? Oh, there you go. It just doesn't like duplicate. I will drag it across. Try that again. Third time lucky. So this is the wrapper email users see. You can brand this, and basically they click this, read this message, and this is where we see how good the guest Wi-Fi is today. If you're on a reasonably normal network, this is fairly quick, and by fairly quick, it's a couple of seconds. I did this yesterday, and it did take a while, so I'll give that a minute. We'll come back to that one as well. Okay, let's go back to our Box account. Let's bring that up here. No, so with the what, sorry? So the OME side of things is purely around the email. If you consider the fact that OneDrive is back-ending onto SharePoint, you can apply restrictions there as well, and who has access to that. And the screen here. There is a lot of roadmap decisions to be made around SharePoint at the moment, and they're largely going to be focused in the next calendar year. So I will get to roadmap shortly, especially if the demos are really this unhappy. But you can protect a SharePoint library. It's kind of leveraging the RMS capability previously, but you can say for this library, I want to turn on IRM, and basically it sits in the library in clear text, so you can collaborate, you can do all that kind of good stuff, and then when you download that document, it then will apply a protection at that point. And that can then be synchronized down to OneDrive as well, and it will carry that protection through. Let me try that one. Now, I typically shy away from recording my demos because I think it looks too polished, and I think there's much better value of being able to kind of deviate, people ask questions and show other things, but then you have days like this and you think, that video didn't look so bad now, actually. Okay, so it's duplicating again, isn't it? Let's find our Box account. Let's see if this is processed. So of course, when we apply a label with protection to an Office application, it doesn't change the extension. So it will still look just like a docx. So if I download this and then open it, what we should see, fingers crossed, although nothing else has worked particularly well today, so maybe not, is the toolbar across the top that tells us, there we go, it is. So what we've effectively done there is encrypt a file that is well beyond your traditional perimeter within a SaaS application in corporate Box and said, no, actually, this is protected. As it happens, the template I've applied is the whole organization, which is a good boundary to have, and it's similar to what we do at Microsoft. So when we say we're going to apply protection to documents, the smaller you make that boundary, the more difficult your support life tends to be, because you will undoubtedly find scenarios you'd not factored in, and people using documents that you weren't aware of that should do, so legitimate use, and then you're going to get help desk calls. So, one of the sort of best practice recommendations we've done ourselves, as well as seeing other customers do, is reducing that to as wide as you can within reason, because still your whole organisation still is not the whole world. So it's a good boundary, because authentication will allow you to access the document.
What happens if you open that document in something other than Word?
To be honest, I've not tried opening a Word document in OpenOffice, but if it's protected, it will have a problem with it. So you're kind of bound on that front. So just conscious of time, what I will do quickly is I will skip back to, there we go, the page is rendered. We'll quickly step through this one, then I'll step back to roadmap briefly. There's some things there I think would be really beneficial to share. So as you can see, I can sign in here with my Google account, and because I'm already signed in, it will carry that token and actually not ask me for credentials, and actually then render this email. And if you look carefully at the URL, I don't know how clear that actually really is, but you can actually see that it's an Office 365 URL. It's not Gmail. And that's going to take some time. So I'm going to park that and we'll go back to the deck. It's on the side here. So I appreciate we're already 5 months into 2018, so this is not a particularly long roadmap, but we are trying to work on a lot of things. And broadly speaking, they're grouped into native, unified, and anywhere. When we talk about native, we're talking about not being bolted on as an add-on, but being built in from the ground up. And the main focus areas here you're going to see is the Microsoft Web applications. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint will support labeling and protection natively built into the app. Same for Mac for Office. And eventually, we'll loop back and we'll do Windows as well. So the actual Office for Windows will be built in and native. We talk about unified, it kind of goes back to that picture at the beginning where we've got lots of products in the Office 365 platform, and ensuring that we're using the same consistent labeling engine throughout. If you look at Office 365 today, you'll see the Security and Compliance Center. You've got the ability to create labels there, and you can apply retention. We've got AIP, you can create labels and do some things there. It's quite confusing which one's the right one to use. So we're working through this piece of work to provide a single AIP-driven labeling engine. And then anywhere. We've seen that users aren't just sitting in Office, it's any device, anywhere, and we need technology that supports that. So we'll be releasing updates to Office for iOS and Android over the course of this year so that you can label and protect from within those applications as well. So a few things we've got coming up. We've got, as we touched on before, Word, PowerPoint, Excel files on a Mac. And as an example here, there's an engineering screenshot. If you see labels rather than RMS templates, which is what you'd see today. And if you select a label that has something like visual markings, it will apply those just as if you're on a Windows machine. So it'd been great for Brandon, who was here before, that loves his Mac. Get that uniform experience no matter what platform you're on. So unification. This is really around the fact we've got Security and Compliance Center, we've got Azure Information Protection. First thing we'll do is make them use the same back-end policy engine, so that whether you create your labels in Security and Compliance Center and then go look in the AAP portal, you will see the same labels. And we're already starting to look at, well, what does this mean going forward? So we've got Security and Compliance Center here. I go to create a label. It looks very similar to what you would see in AOP today. So we see very similar settings. We can predict protection. We also have retention, because retention is just as important as protecting our documents. We don't want sensitive information sitting around for 20 years. We want to try and manage the life cycle of these documents. And if it's got visual markings. So it's all very similar, and this is where we're heading towards, is just providing a simple, consistent experience. And a lot of this is actually built on top of our SDK. So the SDK today will do protection. It's been around for a long time with RMS. We've now got the MIP SDK, which is version 2. It's being used by ourselves for Office for Mac and MCAS for integration across there. Also used by our partners. So Adobe are working on a new version of the PDF document format that supports labeling and protection. That's due to come out into preview around August timeframe, and you'll start to see Adobe products that will display your labeling and protection as well. So Adobe Reader Be able to see it there just as it does in the Office applications. And this isn't being driven by Microsoft. We've not been tapping Adobe on the shoulder going, hey, you really need to come to the party here. This is being driven by our customers going to Adobe saying, we're going on this journey for information protection, and AIP is so important to us that we need this in other products. And PDF is such a prevalent document format out there, we need you to help us here. And they have. And that's my last slide. So just to reiterate, I guess, on this, to summarize, we've got the customer experience team, which is what I'm part of, very prevalent on Yammer. It's where we make all our announcements. It's a very active community there, so if you've got questions, feel free to post them, join in. Obviously, talk to your partner, identity experts. We work very closely with these guys. If you see we're missing features you think are super important to your organization, please put them up on user voice. There'll be other people's thoughts there as well, so vote them up if they're important to you. We're fairly active on Twitter using the hashtag #0p. And we have a lady in our team called Carol Bailey, who is fantastic. She's a document writer. And whereas I'm not sure I'd say they were fantastic docs, it's probably a marketing slide, they are actually very good. And if you're new to AIP, it's a really good resource to try and come up to speed of what you need to do there. Thank you.
Cheers, Adam.